All right, welcome back to another episode of the Four Train Savages podcast. We have episode number 76 for you guys. And we now welcome back, Tyler, a recurring guest of the podcast, Mr. Sweeny Murti of WFAN, as well as you guys see him on SNY during the nighttime talking about baseball. Sweeny, thank you very much for spending some more time with us this year. It's about a year later of Yankees baseball. A lot transpired over the past year that we got to talk about. And hopefully we'll get some baseball pretty soon and some baseball news. But how you doing, Sweeny?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back. Happy New Year to you guys.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. So that's where we'll kind of start off. There is baseball, and the players in the league have a meeting on Monday, Sweeny. I think that was one of their big meetings that's coming up. I think the last one was it last Saturday, or it was this or I can't remember exactly when their last meeting was.
About a weekend ago, I think. Yeah.
Yes, somewhere around there. But I've been reading a lot of reports because, we're waiting for baseball news, anything that we can kind of hope for. And we know that these two sides are very kind of stingy, kind of pinned against each other, kind of want to fight for what they want. And this could possibly be longer than fans want, maybe some players want. So what is kind of the insight that you could bring, or that you see going on with this lockout right now, and what you kind of see that could be on the horizon, hopefully?
I mean, I think we all hope that a deal is fast. I mean, I think we all know that a deal is going to get done eventually. It's just a matter of when and who gives in to what. It's been a long time coming. I just spoke recently to somebody who was involved in the negotiations for the 2017 CBA, and they knew back then that, things were digging in. And by the time you get to the next one, by the time that deal expires, which was 5 years and which is now, you knew that it was going to be a bigger fight and it was going to get messy. And it has. So we wait to see what happens with the next proposal and see if there's any give and take. Once there's a little bit of movement, then I think we'll start to feel a little bit optimistic about how quickly a deal can be made. But, the issues are pretty simple here. That players have seen how the revenues have grown, and they're getting a smaller piece of it. So you're trying to make sure you get a bigger piece of it and earlier in your career, because that teams have gotten smarter and they're not signing players into their 30s anymore for big money. Well, you're not going to get to free agency in most cases until you're 28, 29, or 30. So it's hard, they're being controlled on the front end. Now they're being controlled on the back end, and they're trying to figure out everybody's trying to figure out how to meet in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sweeny, I think that, from a fan's perspective, and even in the media on Twitter and kind of everywhere on the internet, there's been a little bit of, how Rob mentioned, a little bit of panic with if baseball could potentially start on time or inch into the season a little bit. But did we ever, I think going into this year, I never personally really expected any sort of progress, I think before February. Do you think that kind of coincides with the current timeline, or do you think we're behind schedule a little bit from what, potential projections were?
That was all really part of the process that began with the lockout in early December. And I remember we were probably, I don't know, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks after that, we're getting close to Christmas. And I asked somebody, I said, listen, is there, do we even know of any negotiations scheduled or anything like that? And what was told to me, and this was from somebody close to the players' side, they said the lockout was imposed as a way to try to pressure the players into negotiating. Well, the players knew that it was imposed to pressure the players into negotiating. So they weren't going to fall, they weren't going to fall for the banana in the tailpipe, right? So they're going to wait until on their own schedule, and they can, because, the pressure of deadlines are really the only thing that ever moves anything to get done. And not just in baseball, just in general business and in life. Until you have a deadline, it's really not something that's going to spur action. So the players waited, and so did the owners before, the owners locked up the players and then waited over a month to offer any sort of proposal. So this is the slow moving game, and hopefully it gets a little bit faster, but it does take a little bit, you really kind of wish that they had all their options here. Like you can move back and forth and make this a quick, all right, here's our proposal. All right, we don't like this. How about this one? How about this one? And then move quickly. But what's happening is you take the first proposal, say, okay, we're going to get back to you. And you let them sweat it out a little bit and you wait. I mean, clearly they have their other proposal ready to go, right? But they're probably reacting and tweaking and doing a few things. And then after this side gets that one, they'll say, all right, we'll get back to you. I mean, you know what your reactions are going to be and kind of how you want to move, but there's also a lot of legalese here that takes time to digest. And even once you hear word about a deal being struck, remember, it's going to take, probably a couple of weeks to go through all the legal aspects of it and make sure that it is, that all those parts get ratified, because it is a complicated document. And, there are a lot of parts to it. It's really just, it's the constitution of the game. So it takes a long time to iron out all the details.
Yeah. You got a big game of chicken going on.
Yeah, and they're big time. Like you said, it's going to take time for the legal stuff, but then you also got to think it's going to take some time for the players to ramp up for spring training, and then we know from like the COVID
got free
agency, the rest of free agency. So it's like a lot that still has to happen, and the big sides that like the big things that are being talked about here, and the ones that MLB kind of ignored were the free agency changes, the revenue sharing, competitive balance tax. I think what the league really was looking for in the proposal was the expanded playoffs, a draft lottery system, international draft. They want uniform advertisements now, like the NBA has done. But like one of the big things that like an argument that's been going on for a while when it comes to like player revenue sharing, I think the MLB is maybe a little less than I think what it is in the NBA at this time. I think it's around like 48 to 51% around there. But, it's a lot for, everyone wants to criticize the owners, which I understand completely. But when you think about it, like if they are going to offer more revenue sharing, then they're going to want to introduce a salary cap, which is like a big no that'll then happen. So it's gonna, like you said, it's like Tyler said, it's gonna be a big game of chicken, and there's gonna be a lot of back and forths here, and I don't know what area, like people, how the players are really gonna budge, and I think Ken Rosenthal said the MLB is really willing to test how far the players are willing to go without playing for a while and without those game checks. So I mean, it's gonna be interesting to see.
I mean, if there are no game checks, like the owners are losing money too, right?
Yeah.
So both sides are have a lot to lose there. It's hard to compare baseball to the other sports because they are all salary cap leagues.
Yeah.
And they were made such at times when those leagues were in trouble. And there were things that had to happen in order to further the survival of those leagues.
Mm-hmm.
It's never been proven that needs to happen in baseball, which is why we've never gotten there. And the union is stronger in baseball than the other sports because, again, they didn't acquiesce to the salary cap decades ago like the other sports did, and it was vital to their survival. So it's never been proven to be vital to baseball's survival. And there are certain teams that talk about that, but baseball is also different than football because of the the local broadcasts. No such thing as local TV broadcasts in football.
Yeah.
So that changes the dynamic in the landscape. I don't know. There's no perfect answer here. I mean, you just. I think you really just want, because there are always going to be some sort of problems with the product that you need to tweak here and there. And I think you just want the players want what was taken away from them the last couple of agreements. They have a little less power in basically in getting paid earlier in their careers and later in their careers. Mentioned earlier, the owners have kind of figured out how to shut it down on the back end when players get into their 30s. Well, if you're going to do that, the players want it made up to them earlier because there's more money being made in the sport and less being given to them. So that's basically, why we are where we are.
Yeah.
Sweeny, it feels like a lot of the MLBPA's focus, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, we know that the big guys are going to get paid, the Garrett Coles of the world, the Carlos Correas, et cetera. Does it come off that they're more fighting for the middle ground players, the guys that don't make obviously 20 to $30 million a year. Is that really like their, the hill they're going to die on? Is that kind of the make or break, do we think, or are there definitely a ton of different avenues that of course come into play?
Yeah, I don't know if it's right to characterize it one way or the other, but just remember, you're representing hundreds of players equally, not, you're not representing the $30 million a year player more than you're representing the $500,000 a year player. They're all equal as members of the union. And I think it's important to remember too, when we're talking about the idea of millionaires fighting against billionaires, look at the large majority of the players. And okay, sure, the major league minimum is $500,000 a year, and that's it's more than the average working man is going to make. But you have to recognize that player is only going to make that for a very short period of time in their life, and most likely done before they're 30, right? And probably not making that until they're in their mid-20s anyway, when they're in the minors. And this has been well documented a lot recently. They're fighting for wages, they're bad living conditions, having to, in many cases, trying to pay for training as well in order to become better players. And it's hard to catch up to that. So the idea that players are fighting to make, I'm just making this number up, but if you're making 1 million and you rather make 2 million, and the average person can't relate to that, and I understand why, but the average person is also going to be looking at a career, hopefully, that they will have for 30 or 40 years at hopefully a decent wage. And that's not the case for the vast majority of Major League Baseball players. Keep in mind that there are only, I think 22,000 players or something like that in the history of Major League Baseball. You look at Baseball Reference, it's at the top, right?
That's mind blowing.
I mean, think about any that's a small crowd at any baseball game you're going to. You're like, oh, this isn't a lot of people. That's the total number of people that have ever played Major League Baseball, and that includes all the people who played for 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Not the guys who we're not talking about the guys who played for 10, 15, or 20 years and made fortunes that they can pass on to their children. That's the important part to remember when you're thinking about millionaires versus billionaires and Garrett Cole versus whoever else you want to pick, and talk about like what they're really fighting for.
Yeah, it's going to be, we'll see what happens Monday. I think that we'll probably release this episode Monday, so hopefully it may come with some good news. But yeah, let's, last time we spoke to you, Sweeny, it was, we were thinking the Yankees were in a prime position to possibly take over and be a top dog in the American League, not just the American League East. And I brought it up quite a bit during the time of the podcast last season that you said, don't forget about Tampa at all. Tampa could still be here.
Yeah.
And they were.
They were.
Yeah.
I'm not the only one. I'm not that smart.
So, but yeah, that kind of expectation for Yankees fans, just a really weird season. And, like, you've been watching baseball longer than we have, but for me at least, and I don't know, Tyler, you may agree, it had to be the most frustrating season of baseball to watch as a Yankees fan. Like, just knowing the expectations that were there and just the constant peaks and valleys it just felt like every other week it felt like
a 75 win team, not a 92 win team by any means.
It was crazy. And I was at the game. I heard your post game after the Angels grand slam, because I was there for the Jared Walsh, and he hit the grand slam, and it was just, I was on the train back and I heard the Chapman gave it up, and it's just deflating. And so just before we get into like what they're going to do, what did you make of like last season? Was it frustrating for you after like recapping games and just putting together what was happening with the team? Because as frustrating as it was for fans, like, how was that?
Well, I think it says a lot when Tyler talks about 92 wins, felt like 75. I mean, they're 92 wins, I mean, that's hard to do. I understand everybody had bigger expectations for this season, but let's remember, this really came down to one thing. The team didn't hit. Okay. They did not score runs at the rate we thought they were going to. consistently. And you had 3 or 4 players who massively underperformed in that offense, and it dragged everything down and it affected everything else. There were a lot of times when, fans would talk about the pitching moves that were made and why isn't this guy in? Why isn't that guy in? And the reason you're arguing about that is because it's a close game, got to win this game. But the problem is they were all close games. And there were never days, the Yankees offense was designed to slug and hit. And there were going to be days, there were supposed to be days where you could be up by 5 or 6 runs comfortably and maneuver your pitchers differently, and then have guys available for the games that are a lot closer. And those days never materialized. The Yankees played in all those close games constantly. And when you do that, you're going to have games where you say, you know what? I can't use Chad Green today. I can't use Jonathan Loaiza today. I've got to use somebody else. And you start bringing other guys, and you might end up losing a game, sometimes, or, the result just doesn't work the right way. And it's like, okay, don't know what else to do, because there's another game tomorrow. And I have to be prepared to be able to win that game tomorrow. I can only do as much as I can today. And for too many days, the Yankees offense, which again was designed to score a lot of more runs than they did, just never did.
Yeah. I mean,
I think we'll look back on, just for example, the, 1 game wild card opening lineup, and we'll go, in 2, 3, maybe 4 years and go, wow, like Gardy was hitting 6th. Andrew Velasquez was starting in Fenway for the first time ever. It was just, it's kind of baloney looking back at it.
I mean, listen, the team had some issues, right? They managed to get in, and it is still making the playoffs. I understand that, there are people who don't feel that way, but it is making playoffs. They had issues. They underperformed, and their starting pitcher that night was pitching for the last 3 or 4 weeks on a bad hamstring. It didn't line up. The Yankees had stronger teams, I think, in 18 and 19, and really strong teams, and came up short. So it's amplified. What we're looking at is amplified because the whole Baby Bombers era, which was supposed to really take off after 2017, is kind of ending flatly without a championship, because they're no longer Baby Bombers. They're making a lot more money. They're no longer cheap, controllable young assets, which every team desires. They've passed through the arbitration years. They're going to get to free agency here very soon, and they don't have championship rings to show for it. So it got a little maddening. And listen, 2020 was a big part of it. 21 was a part of it. Things happen. They had a bunch of injuries in 19. Somehow managed to overcome that with and still get a number of wins. But it's not perfect. I think the last 2 years have had their own separate issues. But I think the one thing that you look at with this team that you can't say for every team is that they're in this conversation, and I think that. That to me is why that 92 win thing is pretty important. There's not a year, were either you guys alive the last time the Yankees won, fewer than 80 games, that they were not in playoff contention in September?
I have to look in the mid 2010s, but I don't think so.
Listen, there's a difference between dominating your division and not being in playoff contention, right? And I don't think we always see that. The fact that there may be 2 or 3 games out, and oh my gosh, the Red Sox are in first place. So oh my gosh, Tampa Bay's in first place. Well, they're allowed to be. They're allowed to be good, I mean, this doesn't have to be the 98 Yankees every year. And I think when they're not the 98 Yankees, we say, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? What you're going to play? You're going to play the season and see how it happens. And if you happen to win 94 games and somebody else wins 96, oh, well, if you happen to win 103 games and somebody else wins 108, guess what? That happens. So I don't love the idea of looking at them as, it's a total failure. I understand the mission statement of winning a World Series. By that, 29 teams are going to be failures. I get it. But there's a process to play it out. So when you're in and they've been in contention, and there are other teams that, at times haven't been. The Red Sox mixed in a 10-year period, while mixing in 3 World Series, also were in last place 3 times. Yeah. That means, July, August, September, where those games mean nothing because you're in last place. Is that and I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if that's acceptable. Yeah. Because those World Series championships aren't guaranteed. You look, okay, the Red Sox won those series, but was it okay that they finished in last those other years? And, is that accepted? If you're a fan, do you want every game of every season to mean something and hope you have a chance to win? Or are you going to sit there and say, oh, well, it's July 28th and we're, 18 games out of first, and I guess it's not going to happen this year. Well, what am I going to do? I don't know. I'm not saying there is a right answer. It's just a question worth asking to me. Yeah.
Just to play devil's advocate, definitely. Cause on the whole season that we were talking, and I would go back and text strings with Tyler and other friends of mine and people just talk about the Yankees. And I get that. Cause we hear on sports talk radio, everyone calling up and, complaining, but it's really just, and this is my opinion from a fan's perspective, that's so passionate about this team, and to see what they did in 2017. And then for us to say, okay, these are our rivals, and we're looking at Houston and we're looking at Boston. And yes, Boston had a really step back season the years after they won the World Series, but it's understandable for Yankee fans to be a little frustrated when they're seeing their direct rivals winning those championships. So yeah, I get both sides of the argument for sure. I just think, and especially there's going to be a ton of pressure on Brian Cashman as well in this season to see what he does in this offseason to kind of bring us into what they can do in 2022. But, we talk about with Tyler, like it's a very big make or break kind of free agency period, and Yankee fans already, it's not over, which we'll get into. But, that first stretch, like you were talking about with deadlines of saying, okay, there is the deadline of everyone signing like Seager, Simeon, all these guys. There's still a crop that is still left for people or for teams to sign. But it didn't start off on the right note for Yankee fans, especially. So that's where I'll kind of pose the question to you. Where do they go now from here? Do you think because I have a hunch that they may be thinking, okay, those were down years. Do we think that a guy like Gio Urshela will stay healthy? Do we think a guy like Aaron Hicks, if he stays healthy, that we're going to get still above average from at his position compared to other center fielders? Like, we're okay with that. Are they going to say, okay, moving Glaber back to second, like we're going to be cool with that, and we're going to think that, okay, he's back at his natural position and he's going to play better? So that's what I kind of think that they're going to rely on a little bit here. Do you think that? Now, the big question is like shortstop. Do you think that they're going to throw a ton of money at Correa? I think there's just a lot of baggage there still that I don't think I think Yankee fans and Cashman are willing to pay him, and the team is willing to. I don't know. He said a lot of stuff about the Yankees and went back and forth with a lot of stuff. He talked about Derek Jeter not deserving Gold Gloves and stuff. So do you see it as like, do you think that they could sign Correa and that would be like a pair that would make sense and he would be willing to come here? Or do you think that they may get a stopgap and wait for Volpe or wait for Peraza? Or what do you think is kind of their go-to plan now once these labor talks are kind of
I don't know yet because I don't know the rules yet, and I think that was the big reason that they were waiting. Most of the big market teams waited to spend their money because you don't know what the rules are going to be like. Because it's not just about 22. The CBA is going to cover the next 5 seasons, and you want to know what the luxury tax thresholds are going to look like, and what the penalties are going to look like, and how that plays out. And if you notice, the Mets did their thing because Steve Cohen's insane, and we're going to have to see if he keeps going in this direction over the course of the next several years, or if there's going to be a time when he scales back at a particular point in time. And I can't wait to hear what the reactions are going to be when that happens, when the Mets actually pass on somebody because they cost too much or whatever.
Total freak out.
The Red Sox didn't spend a lot of money. The Yankees didn't spend a lot of money. The Dodgers, on paper they did, but mostly because they re-signed Chris Taylor was their biggest expenditure. Mm-hmm. They're still waiting. They let Seager go. They're still trying to figure out what they're doing. So I feel like the Yankees are in the same boat as other teams. They're waiting to see what the rules are. So until you know what the rules are, it's hard to really project what they're doing here. And I think the one thing here I think about Carlos Correa, and it was news this week that he switched to Scott Boras as an agent, and people wondering what that means. I think the one thing, and whether he switched agents or not, I think this would be true. The one thing that always played into the favor of a player like that in free agency was the long game, the waiting game. Okay. I mean, Scott Boras, brilliantly recognized this a long time ago. Why are you signing in November? Nothing starts until February. Why, what's the rush? So you wait and you maximize that market and you play it out. There are a lot of free agents that aren't going to be able to play that game when this CBA gets settled, because you're going to be in a rush to get to through spring training and make sure you don't miss games. So the free agent signing period is going to be fast, and it's going to move fast. And so to be able to sit there and wait back and wait for an offer like Bryce Harper or Manny Machado did a couple of years ago, that advantage is lost to the player. So what does that mean for the Yankees? I have no idea. There are roads they can take here. They have options. And I think that's where you just kind of wait to see how they tip their hand once business goes back in. And the luxury tax thresholds are a really big part of this, because it affects the Yankees and the Red Sox more than anybody else in any other division, because, I mentioned this on the radio the other day, and I've talked about this before. The Yankees' adherence to a luxury tax isn't about being able to afford the tax or trying to pocket more money in profit. Do you know where the tax goes? Some of that money goes to Tampa Bay Rays. Goes to lower revenue teams, and by doing that, you're subsidizing your competition. You're giving them money to get better and beat you. And in the Yankees and Red Sox cases, Tampa Bay, who's already really good at using their resources and already has a really good team, you play them 19 times a year. You're basically saying, here, let me help you beat us a few more times this year. And it's not the case in other divisions with other teams as much. So that's why and the Red Sox have stuck to it at times too. We pay closer attention to it because of the Yankees. This is why the luxury tax thresholds matter to those teams. And this is why it needs to be higher. This is why they want it to be higher. But it's hard to project where you're going to go here until you know the penalties. And the adherence to the luxury taxes really is about the idea that, in part, you are subsidizing your competition and helping them try to beat you.
Mm-hmm. It's too bad that it fell through for Tampa to move to Montreal the other day. I saw that.
That was a bummer. Yeah.
I
want them to have a good stadium.
We cannot keep playing in the Trop. It's just absolutely just the worst.
Listen, they're not getting it. Those players are not getting worse when they move out of the building.
It's an advantage for them, but that's why we hate it. It's just like, oh my God.
They're good is the advantage. Remember 20 years ago when they were bad and the Yankees, it wasn't a home field advantage. They weren't winning 14 out of 19 meetings 20 years ago.
True.
They're good now.
Yeah.
They're good, great organization over there. To pivot a little bit, Sweeny, I know, last time we talked to you, approaching a year ago, I believe it was, March, maybe early April. But I remember asking, I was like, hey, who is kind of like the sleeper pick this year that could really, perform for the Yankees and go out there and make a big impact? And your answer was Aaron Hicks. And I think, we all kind of mutually agreed. If Aaron Hicks shows up, exactly. If Aaron Hicks shows up, like, that's going to be great for this team. Obviously, didn't happen in 2021, injuries. And, while he was on the field, he didn't, opposed to what other fans may think statistically, he didn't necessarily, play bad. But moving into 2022, do you think the Yankees depend on Aaron Hicks moving forward? Is there, if we kind of forget about the luxury tax, say it goes up to $250, do you think they go out and spend and pay someone a similar contract and almost, put Hicks in like a fourth outfielder role? Do you think they address it at all? What are kind of your thoughts on center field?
I think they have to look at center. I think Brian Cashman mentioned that they're looking at center field. And the way I took that is, they're not looking for a backup center fielder. It's not hard to find a backup center fielder. You need to find, if you're trying to improve that position, it means you're trying to find a starting center fielder and maybe pushing Aaron Hicks to a fourth outfielder's role. I think that, I know a lot of people like what they saw from Giancarlo Stanton in the field and like the options that opened up. But I think overall, it's best not to use him out there a lot. I think, you really want his bat in the lineup, right? And it's going to stay in the lineup more the less you put him out there, and you can be more athletic in the outfield without him out there. So I think when I heard Brian Cashman say about, obviously he said, obviously they're going to address shortstop. He said, maybe center field. It told me that they have to explore the options to see if they can find a starting center fielder. And however that fits in, luxury tax, trade, free agent, whatever. That's how I read that. And I think it's smart because you're talking about a player coming off of a major injury and now into his 30s. You have to think about how your team is best served here. I'm getting stronger up the middle. Shortstop, center field is where this team has to focus.
Yeah, not necessarily a team hindering contract. I know there's a lot of people on the Twitter world and Yankees Twitter that are very upset with Aaron Hicks's contract, but center fielder in the major leagues that when, he's on the field is average, slightly above average at times as well. Not a team hindering deal. So I think there definitely can be room.
Starting, the way I looked at it then when they signed it is that, think about if you let him walk as a free agent and tried to, and you didn't have anybody else ready to replace him, to sign a free agent center fielder would have cost you a lot more than $10 million a year. So you had a player there that, you saw potential to grow a little bit more. And unfortunately the injuries have got him, those deals are going to hurt.
Yeah. I think also too, they're not just restricting them to just free agency when it comes to center field, but there is a possibility, especially if they then sign another shortstop or however they end up doing it. I mean, the other day, I think on Wednesday they signed last Saturday they signed another top prospect, international prospect for shortstop. So
the top shortstop, yep.
Tyler and I are big advocates for not prospect hugging. So could there possibly be a potential that, Brian Cashman goes ahead and makes some trades and makes some deals? Because I mean, your middle infield together may be, because I think they've been talking about Peraza is more of a not really suited for shortstop. Would they want to move him possibly to second base or third base? And Volpe, what do they want to do there? I think they're probably going to end up keeping him, but there's always the potential that they could trade off to another team. I know Yankees fans were going crazy over Matt Olson for like a week, and that could still possibly be something that comes up after. But do you think like a trade possibility is kind of in their minds, or do you think they're still just exploring all options when it comes to that?
Yeah, they're always, I don't think this is the thing. Like, I think a lot of people sit there and say, what is their plan? Well, you always have multiple plans. You're not in charge of every single thing by yourself. You can't control it all by yourself. So if you have your eye on a free agent and he signs somewhere else, or he doesn't fit with how much money he's asking for, you have to have other options. Sure, you rank them, say this is plan A, B, whatever, but they don't know what they're going to do at shortstop because there are too many variables here. They have options. Could they trade one of these guys? Sure. And listen, the international guys, they signed a 16-year-old kid. He's not going to be a shortstop for the Yankees next year or the year after that or the year after that. So
for a long time.
let's, and I understand part of it is that nothing else is going on, so you're paying attention to that. Otherwise, it would have happened in the middle of summer, and you wouldn't have blinked, right?
Oh yeah, we got to clamor to anything that's coming out now, Sweeny.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot more attention on prospects now than there used to be, just because internet lets you look up. Here's who a guy is. Here's what somebody said about him. Here's much money he's going to make. Oh my gosh, bring him up now. Like that's not how it works.
Yeah.
So. You need to, and listen, I don't think they prospect hug as much as you think, because there are trades to be made, and you end up making the trades. And this is what you need. You need people that, I think when you make trades and you're able to make trades with multiple teams, it shows you that your system is pretty good. Because listen, what are the Yankees always doing? They're always trading prospects. They're never trading pieces off their major league roster to get deals done. Whenever they make a deal, all they're trading are prospects, always, right? So very rare is the chance where they're selling off pieces. They're trying to buy pieces, which means other teams find their system attractive. So this is kind of part of filling it up. And a lot of times they have had trouble getting guys to develop and stick, but a lot of that's part of the expectations too. I don't think anybody here would be okay with watching one player flourish on a 79 win team. You want a guy to come in and hit the ground running and look like a Hall of Famer from day one and help your team win a World Series. That's a hard bar to cross. So I think it's just it's all part of the thing, man. There's not any one set answer here. There's not any one path to take. There's just a lot of options here, and they have, Correa's out there and Story's out there, and there are possibilities. Trading Peraza would be a possibility. Trading Volpe would be a possibility. But I think you have to see how the whole puzzle fits together.
Yeah. A lot of different options.
Yeah, I think Volpe is one of those players that I think the expectations are already crazy high. And, in theory, I think he played 20 some odd games in AA last year, and he has absolutely shot up, rankings across the board. I believe he's like the 10th ranked prospect in the MLB.
Yeah.
Out of the
I
whole
saw that
thing
the other day. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously the number one Yankees prospect ahead of Jason Dominguez now as well.
Can I tell you something about Anthony Volpe? As I asked somebody this probably about a month ago, I said, listen, remember Volpe signed out of high school rather than going to college, and the Yankees drafted him, was the 20th overall pick, I think. I asked somebody if he had gone to college and he was going to go to Vanderbilt, where would he be? And he progressed as a player like we've seen him progress now, because he had a monster season last year. Where do you think he'd be as a college junior right now? Where would he be positioned in this upcoming draft? And I got anywhere from 1 or 2 to 8 or 10, Wow. Definitely, people were telling me definitely the highest college position player picked, or definitely in the top 5, no worse than 10, which tells you, one, that it's a player the Yankees could not get if he had gone to college. Okay. The Yankees are drafting in the top 10. So this is and this player, this isn't just about Yankee hype. This is people from around the league who tell me this is where he would be drafted if he was going to college next year, if he was still in college. So the Yankees got a player that's highly touted and highly thought of, and had a great minor league season. At age 20, he had a season that in various ways is comparable to what Derek Jeter did at age 20. And I say this to point out, not that Anthony Volpe is going to play 20 years in the big leagues, get 3,400 hits, become captain of the Yankees, and go to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
I'm pointing it out to say that when you're 20 years old and you're looking at what this player looks like, this is what a lot of people think Anthony Volpe looks like, what Derek Jeter looked like when he was 20, how he carries himself, how he adjusts the plate, how he plays in the field, things he's able to do. So many other factors go into what the next 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years are going to be about. But this is why it's hard to put comps on guys. When you say, someone says he reminds me of Jeter, it's like, oh my gosh, he's going to get 3,400 hits. He's going to go to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
No, that's not what it means.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of reason to be excited about Anthony Volpe and Oswald Peraza, who some people say is a terrific fielder, and that he will hit in the big leagues. He had a terrific season last year. And I think that was one of the big things. And I talked to Kevin Reese, the Yankees vice president of player development, about this recently. The Yankees had a lot of players in the minor leagues, if you look at some of their stats and keep up, that they performed well. They had good years, and that's a lot different than what the Yankees prospects over the last several years we've talked about. Guys like Esteban Florial, he hasn't had a good minor league season in years. It's always been about tools and potential. You even go back, Aaron Judge and Gary Sanchez didn't have years like this in the minor leagues. Greg Bird, who was a highly thought of prospect, did not have seasons like this in the big leagues. These are people who, were all about tools and potential, and you saw certain things there. Anthony Volpe and Oswald Peraza had really good years last year. Everson Pereira had a really good year last year. There are players who performed, and that's what is going to make it really interesting to watch how they develop over the course of the next year or two, because they aren't prospects because of potential. They're prospects because of what they've already done at the minor league level.
Yes, very true. I mean, it's depending on what the Yankees do, like, with a trade situation, it could be shaping up the next crop of baby bombers. The next ones, like pairing with Dominguez and Volpe and Peraza.
There's a lot of pressure on that, because I think the other mistake we all make is thinking that, if the Yankees win a World Series, well, they're just going to win 3 in a row or 4 out of 5.
Yeah, it's not that easy.
That's the biggest mistake we can make. The sport's not set up that way anymore. And in fact, all the luxury tax things that went in 20 years ago, well, do you think it's a coincidence that happened right as the Yankees had won 4 out of 5 World Series, and the rest of the league was wondering how they were going to keep up? I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yes.
The luxury tax went in, and all these other parameters went in to try and even out the playing field. So this is part of the danger of what happens. Every time something happens, remember the draft went in after the Yankees would just basically sign any player they wanted to, right? Then let's have a draft. Okay, well, it took a while. Then free agency finally happened. The Yankees started winning again, and there were other ways to curtail that free agency and giving up players and draft picks, and then collusion happened, right? Oh, so then the Yankees finally win again, and they say, what? Let's have a luxury tax. Okay. There are different ways. So the biggest mistake any of us can make is thinking that if the Yankees win a World Series, that they're going to come in bunches again, because the sport's not just not set up that way anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Sweeny, I mean, if anything this past 4 years has done since 2017 and just, sniffing that World Series appearance, it's humbled Yankee fans, at least me. I know there's still some Yankee fans out there that are just like, no, we're getting back and we're rattling off another dynasty. It's like, I don't know if it's that easy. So yeah, completely agree with you. But Tyler, if you have anything else, I was going to ask, do you have, didn't want to open up a big can of worms, but do you, because a lot of conversation has been about the Hall of Fame. Do you have a Hall of Fame vote?
I do not have a vote. I'm not a member of the Baseball Writers Association.
Okay.
And I actually wrote a big column about this. You want to go check it out. It's on WFAN.com. I wrote all about it. I can tell you why I don't have a vote, because I'm a broadcaster, not a writer.
Okay.
But I wrote a column on our website and explains a lot of just my thoughts on this ballot. And so I'll point you there to answer some of the questions, but if you got anything specific, you can go ahead.
I guess we can bring this up, because I guess we sent out a tweet from our account. And I guess we could say that we ruffled a little feathers, because Curt Schilling quote tweeted us, and I tweeted it out saying, if David Ortiz is a Hall of Famer, so are Alex Rodriguez, Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds, and the rest of the notable steroid users. And now I know that the complete difference that comes with A-Rod's baggage and Barry's baggage and Clemens' baggage is very different from what David Ortiz. But I think in the public eye of seeing that he was on that report, and I mean, there was even a big speculation about Piazza when he was going. Everyone thought that he did steroids, and Curt Schilling quote tweeted it and was not happy, or was dismissed it. So what do you think, because of his association with that report that wasn't supposed to be public but ended up being public, and right now he's leading the votes at 85%, do you think that could possibly open up a can of worms for further steroid users, or do you think that they have any kind of shot in this coming up, like it's Bonds' and Clemens' last time on the ballot? Or what are your feelings on that?
To go back, I mean, you say you understand the differences between all those guys, but then don't understand that why Ortiz is I mean, the differences are why Ortiz is leading the vote and those other guys are not getting it. And keep in mind that, Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens for 3 years in a row are going to get more than 60% of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
That will win you every election in this country.
Yeah. That's a good
But
point.
the problem is the threshold is 75%.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do. And these are the points that I made in the column I was talking about. Getting to 75% is very difficult. It's hard to get 4 of your friends to agree where to go to lunch, where to go out for drinks, do whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
And now do it by 400. Now you're going to say you have a certain viewpoint and that's fine, but it's likely that you've made up your mind on how you think this should be treated. Now get 400 of your friends together and see if 300 of them agree with you.
Oh yeah. It's definitely not going to happen.
That's why it's so
Yeah.
hard. 75% of people to agree on how it's treated when there are no guidelines on how to treat PED use or suspected use, alleged use, however you want to call it. There are no guidelines for this. However, sportsmanship, character, and integrity are are part of the very small guidelines that Hall of Fame voters are asked to consider. How do you define it? Well, again, call 400 of your friends and ask every one of them how they define character, sportsmanship, and integrity, and see if they all agree.
Yeah.
Now you're also talking about crossing over lines of timeline of, okay, well, it was in Bonds and Clemens' case. Well, they were Hall of Famers before we did this. How do you know? Do you know exactly what and when they did? I don't. I have some suspicions and some evidence to point me to a certain way, but everything isn't exactly clear. To your point about the testing, there are differences in the timeline of pre-testing and post-testing. The 2003 test, there's enough evidence around that and enough people talking about the idea of false positives. And I mentioned the idea that we live in a COVID world. I think we're all familiar with false positives.
False positives, yeah.
Right? So how that could be interpreted. Okay, well, guess what? Ortiz's name came out. He denied using it, and nothing else has ever stuck to him since. Correct?
He's a very likable guy too.
That's another fact.
That's a different part of this. It's true. It's part, but just strictly, he denied that he had used, and the 2003 was a real positive. Nothing else has stuck to him ever since. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alex Rodriguez, outed with that, admitted to 3 years of PED use.
Yeah.
And then was embroiled in a second PED controversy after that, after testing it, but he didn't test positive, but there was enough evidence to support a 1-year ban from the sport.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're saying, well, why is Ortiz and why is Aaron? That's the difference right there. Okay. Nothing stuck to Ortiz. You can say he was in that report, but the evidence didn't stick to him and he denied it. A-Rod admitted to it and then had another scandal after that. That's the difference between those guys. They're not all equal. And forget about the fact that whether they're equal or not, how 400 of your friends determine that is part of it.
Yeah.
There's not one set definition, and everybody's going to interpret it differently. The Hall of Fame has offered no guidelines to their voters on it. So it's up to everybody to decide on their own how to do it. And I guarantee all the people I know who vote, they don't feel like they're iron fisting us and saying my way is the right way. I think they're all pretty, it's complicated for them and they do not know exactly the right way. They try to do it the best they can and then let the 400 votes come in and see if 75% of people agree. Because there isn't one Hall of Fame voter who is determining this is what the Hall of Fame is. It's a group of people trying to figure it out and seeing if the majority agrees with it, and more than the majority agrees with them, because there are a majority of people for the last 6 years, Bonds and Clemens have gotten over 50% of the vote.
It's that 75% threshold. Yeah. For the record, I think that like you said, if I was one of those 470 that had their own opinions and stuff, and Tyler, I believe agrees, I would think that you can't tell the story of the game, and that's a lot that has to happen. And with baseball, it's a lot of history. And I just think that, it's necessary to include them. But yeah, you definitely make very, very good points when it comes to that. I mean, it's is it exactly is like the time that they set in the votes? Do you know when the stop is? I think it was at 46% of the total votes was in, and I think Ortiz had 83 and Bonds and Clemens were over.
That's just people. The votes have all been sent in. It's just a matter
of public knowledge.
Yeah,
I think there's a guy on Twitter that's doing the counting of
it's Ryan Thibodeau. You're saying Ryan Thibodeau, not Mr. Tibbs on Twitter. All he did when reporters tweet out their ballots, he tabulates.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
that's all that is. This isn't. The Hall of Fame itself does not release anything, any voting totals or any votes until the day of the announcement. This is just, in the age of social media.
That's how it gets put together. Yeah.
Yeah. That's all you're doing. You're putting the pieces of the puzzle together.
Gother.
We will see.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just saying, yeah, I mean, we'll see. It'll be interesting. And, there will definitely be no controversy after. No way.
All right, Sweeny, thank you for spending some time with us out of your schedule and taking some time about a little less than I think a year later with us. And hopefully the next time maybe we speak with you, we're talking about the Yankees not doing as so disappointing in the last season, or at least what fans expect that or hope for them, which is a better success and hopefully get to the World Series. But we appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Rob and Tyler, thanks for all your hard work. Appreciate you having me on.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Sweeny.
So that is it for episode 76. As always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Follow us on our social medias at 4Savages, as well as on Instagram at 4TrainSavages. And go ahead and follow, if you're not following already as a Yankees fan, Sweeny Murti at, I believe it's at WFAN Yankees on Twitter.
Yankees WFAN.
There we go. Follow Sweeny as well on Twitter if you're not already. That is it for episode 76. We'll catch you guys next time.